This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is Matthew Valencia, the voice of Robin, Tim Drake.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review.
Hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com.
And on your favorite podcasting app.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 403 of the DCAU Review. I'm Liam. With me, as he always is Cal. Cal, we have one final week. It's a five Saturday month, and as we always do, when we have that extra week to talk about something, we take a trip around the multiverse, and we have landed back in a familiar one we've visited many times before, though there always seems to be hunger from our listeners for more reviews of the Batman, aka the 2004 cartoon Batman, not the Robert Pattinson film. And this week we have a pretty appropriate review based on what we reviewed last week with Elseworlds.
That's right. Yeah, we and honestly, if you are a fan of the movie The Batman with Robert Pattinson, this episode might be right up your alley as well, because there's some similar plot points as we'll talk about here on this week's episode, which features Killer Croc's debut in this universe. And as you mentioned, last week's episode heavily featured a new and improved, or potentially, my theory, a completely different Killer Croc than we first saw in the original Batman the Animated Series run with Love as a Croc. If you want to hear our review of that episode, check out the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app and YouTube. But for this week, yes, we are covering the episode Swamped. And this episode originally aired here in the States on June the 11th, 2005 on the Kids WB. And correct me if I'm wrong, Liam, but I think you've got an official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode.
You would be right on that point there, Cal. We do have a synopsis for the episode Swamped, as mentioned. And we'll get that official IMDb synopsis as well as get into our scores for all four of our categories in just a moment. But first, we'll remind the folks that this episode and every episode we do is brought to you by the best way to support our podcast. And that is, of course, at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review.
Absolutely the best way to support us. So if you're listening to this, we know we have a lot of fans of this particular show. And the way we know that is we've gotten some one-time supports from our supporters encouraging us to review more of these episodes. They say, we have a couple people that every time we review one of these, they're like, this is $1 just to encourage you to review more of this show. Thank you. So perhaps you are one of those listeners, and today is a day of celebration for you, and you are looking to encourage us even more to review more of these episodes as we dwindle down in original DCAU content and reviews. We, of course, have found ways to review them multiple times and include additional ways to look at the content itself. But here, we do like the original reviews if we can get them in there more often than not. So yeah, we're up for ideas here. If you like the Batman, one way to encourage us would be to head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review and send us a one-time support there. Let your voice be heard. It's kind of like, remember back in the day, most of our listeners probably won't remember this, but back in the day when they decided whether they were going to kill Jason Todd or not, there was a 1-900 number that you had to dial, which cost people money to actually vote to kill or save Robin, I believe. And famously, a lot of people paid to kill Jason Todd. So if this is less grotesque than that, so if you would like to, encourage us to have more Batman episodes, head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, become a one-time supporter of the podcast, send a little note that says, more The Batman, please, or something along those lines, and we'll get the message. Or you can become a one-time supporter of the podcast if you want to, and let your voice be heard. And not only can you influence us to potentially review more episodes of The Batman, but if you join us at our Super Friend tier, which is one of our 3 tiers, but Super Friend tier is the top tier, you also have the opportunity to ask us a question about the next The Batman review and potentially hear your question answered on the air. So whether you want to become a one-time supporter or a monthly supporter of the podcast, we invite you to head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. The best way to support the podcast. please head over today and consider supporting us today.
Absolutely. So this is the official IMDb synopsis for Swamped, which was written by Thomas Pugsley and Greg Klein, directed by Brandon Vietti, with music by Thomas Jones, not that one, and animation by DR Movie Co. And that synopsis reads as such. Killer Croc, a half-man, half-reptile, plans to submerge all of Gotham underwater to carry out his scheme of plundering the city.
Plundering.
Pretty good.
That's a good one. I like that. Yeah. Good job, IMDb writer. You broke out the thesaurus this week and you used some words. Plundering. That's a good one. I like that rather than just like robbing. It's good choice of words there.
Yeah. You get the gold star from us. So we will get into our own plot recap. Although honestly, that one, is the case with especially I feel like these early episodes, Cal, as we'll talk about, these plots are not complicated. So that synopsis did cover, but we'll go a little bit more beat by beat through it. As we open on a nighttime in Gotham, we see a crocodile man swimming through the bay. And we see some very talented, apparently, jewel thieves who are about to make off with some ill-gotten gains, diamonds and such, discussing how they're going to divvy up their cut in a back alley when who should appear but Killer Croc in the flesh, or the scales. And he informs them in no uncertain terms that while he appreciates their work and their cohesiveness, they're not going to be splitting anything three ways. Everything's going to go through him as their new boss.
All right, we lay low until the heat's off. Then we move the rocks. Clear?
Crystal, speaking of heat... Oh, man, is that the bat?
Boys, I'm a whole different breed of animal. And one butt ugly hood ornament. Looks like you had a busy night. That's good, because you're all working for me now. Gentlemen, show the walking freak show who's boss around here. You city boys need to learn yourself some manners. Who are you? Name's Croc. Killer Croc, but you can call me boss.
And we cut back to the next day, I guess, as the at the Batcave, where we see Bruce reading the news, and he's noticed that there's been a bunch of unrelated heists, including jet skis and explosives, and he's determined that all of these things must be related, which is interesting because there's like 300 super criminals stealing things in Gotham City all the time. So I don't know why these particular heists are related, but he's convinced, and as we find out, his instincts are correct. But as he is discussing this and trying to think of a connecting link between all of these heists, Alfred, we see in the background, is doing some spring cleaning, as he calls it, and is arranging several items from Batman's previous cases. We see an hourglass from the Riddler, a giant Joker card, and even a giant Scarface robot head. I think we've reviewed some of those episodes, though not all of them.
Apologies, Master Bruce. Just a bit of spring cleaning.
Alfred, where are you taking the evidence?
These cases are closed. They are now history, in every sense of the word. It would be criminal to not preserve these items for posterity. So I've chosen to archive them. A private museum, if you will. After all, the Batman may someday enjoy a more favorable place in society's view.
Yeah, I won't hold my breath. Water.
Actually, I'd prefer a spot of iced tea if you're headed to the kitchen.
No, the link between the robberies. Water. A half dozen within spitting distance of a canal, and 3 on Gotham Bay.
Later that night, we see Batman looking out over the harbor, and he spies a small boat next to a larger freighter They seem to be robbing it quite a bit as they have taken the crewmen hostage and are taking on some supplies. As one of the criminals hoists up the crane, Batman shows up hanging down on it and takes down the thugs pretty easily. And as Croc jumps down to contend with Batman, he notices a stack of some kind of pressurized gas tanks and begins slicing off the back of them, creating sort of makeshift missiles shooting out at Batman. Batman avoids most of them, but then when he tries to actually go toe-to-toe with Croc, it's clear that Croc is stronger and tougher than Batman and is actually able to grab him and send him sinking down to the bottom of the Gotham River, with Croc pushing him all the way down to the bottom, seemingly leaving Batman there to drown, though Batman notices that one of those gas tankers that wasn't opened has rolled to the bottom as well, so he's able to use that the pressure from the gas to sort of propel himself back to the surface to prevent any drowning. But unfortunately, Croc and his compatriots get away as they leave in a boat speeding away. We cut back to their headquarters, which apparently is in some kind of a sewer there, as one of the henchmen is complaining about how Croc has treated them, and that he's quite unhappy and he wants to take over and make some changes of his own. However, Croc shows up to intimidate him and tells him that not to worry, as pretty soon they've got a plan in motion here that is going to make them all very rich and very wet, as it turns out.
Boss Croc definitely does not have both oars in the water.
Yeah, he calls this slime pit headquarters.
Well, maybe you two should mention that to Croc. Me, I like my teeth just where they are. Yeah, well, first chance I get, it's after Wild Crocodile. Sure do hate to see my boys so unhappy. Oh, not me, boss. I'm happy. As a clam. Good. Because this time tomorrow, the tops of skyscrapers will be our lily pads, and downtown Gotham will be our oyster.
Yeah, that's right. So Batman, fresh off of kind of licking his wounds in his first fight with Croc, is back in the Batcave, and we see that the Batwave goes off as he's sitting there kind of discussing what happened with Alfred, and we see that the area around the city's financial district is flooding. So this means that Bruce has to quickly get dressed and head back out to see what's going on as the streets seem to be flooding. Meanwhile, in the flooded Gotham, we see that Killer Croc and his three men are running around on their own jet skis, making away with a bunch of money bags and a bunch of jewels. We see that Batman shows up not only riding his own bat jet ski, but also wearing a nifty little bat wetsuit also at the same time. So we see Batman begin chasing Croc on one of these jet skis as Croc rides his own jet ski. Then one of the gang members shows up, knocking Batman. They're able to knock Batman off as they corner him between the two of them. Croc backhands Batman off of the jet ski. He goes flying. And seemingly Croc thinks that he and his men have gotten away. So we see that actually what happens is one of the henchmen ends up driving toward Batman, who has submerged himself, and is able to surprise this gang member jumping out and surprising him. And we see that the henchman loses consciousness and wakes up flipped upside down, seeing Batman seeing Batman from his POV upside down. We realize that he's hanging upside down, and Batman is prepared to do a classic Batman thing here with interrogation tactics.
Croc's story. Spill it.
He's ex-military, I think. Mercenary type. Some think he's a genetic experiment, a crossbreed soldier or something. Others think he messed with the wrong kind of voodoo in the bayou. Me, I'm thinking circus freak.
Facts, not folktales.
What's to tell? Croc's new in town. He's got big plans.
Bigger than robbing banks?
Croc said today's flood was just a dry run.
If I wanted to do some big city croc hunting, where would I go?
No way. Boss Croc's cold-blooded, man. I talk, I wind up fish food.
You don't talk. We could all wind up fish food.
Batman then jumps into he has like this underwater bat propulsion sub, and he decides to go deep diving. We see he also has a rebreather, which we'll talk about maybe in visuals. It's an homage to another Batman's rebreather. We see him going deep down under the waters, through the city's sewers, through some tunnels. Where else is Killer Croc going to be? But he arrives at a dry area where we see in the sewers is none other than Croc's stolen money and jewels. In addition, we see that he's also got a bunch of schematics for some of the other canals in the area. It's at this point that Croc arrives home and welcomes Batman to his humble abode, and tells him that it's a little place for him to kick his feet up and catch his breath, as he says, in between his jobs. So we see that Batman then puts two and two together and realizes that Croc's plan is probably has something to do with these canal pumps. Croc confirms that he is, in fact, going to flood the rest of these canal tunnels.
Schematics of Gotham's canals.
You sure got a lot of bloodhound in you for a bat. What do you think? A dry little spot to catch my breath between heists.
And right beside the overflow pumps for Gotham's canal system.
They were designed to drain the canals into the bay in case of flooding. But I did some thinking. If you reverse the pumps...
They draw water in from the bay, filling the canals, until they submerge any part of Gotham situated below sea level.
Just about all of downtown, where the good shopping is.
Tens of thousands of lives could be lost.
And I'll shed a crocodile tear for each and every one.
So we see Batman none too happy about this, and attempt to go mano a mano or mano a croco. I'm not sure at this point, but Croc breaks out that he actually has two pets, crocodiles, of course, that threaten Batman, and he sicks these hungry crocodiles on Batman, giving him enough of a breather to escape. Batman is tied up with these crocodiles, not literally, but figuratively, and has to think quickly as they are clearly very hungry. He's able to lure them into a little tunnel and then jump over them, throw an exploding batarang above them, causing the tunnel to collapse. And I guess it's bye-bye crocodiles. I think he just crushes them to death. There's like a tradition, I guess, in Batman cartoons that he's allowed to kill crocodiles, right? We see him do it in Dollar and the Bat episode Jar the Underdwellers in Batman the Animated Series. We see him do it here in this Croc episode. No friend to crocodiles is the Batman. So we then see that Batman is able to get away at this point since he's taken care of the crocodiles. And we cut to the canal pumps. Killer Croc has arrived with his gang, and we see him begin the process of reversing the pump drains. And Batman, of course, shows up once again, knowing exactly where he's going to be. Croc mentions that he's a lot like a annoying fly in something before he gets cut off. You can fill in the blanks there. And at this point that he and Batman engage in some hand-to-hand combat. Again, Batman is quickly overwhelmed. He initially attempts to reverse the canal. He isn't quite able to get it done. He's a little bit too weak for it, as we see. Obviously, Croc's a big hulking crocodile man, and it's even hard for him to get this pump moving. So Batman moving it in the reverse direction is even more hard. We then see him taking care of Croc's henchmen, which by tying them up. But we do see that at this point, it is going to have to come down to Batman versus Croc, kind of how we kind of expected it to be from the get-go here, as Batman does his best to try and cut off this water supply. As the waters of Gotham continue to rise, things are looking scary for the Batman, who gets hurled into the water and into the mud. And Croc continues to openly mock him, seemingly saying that he might as well just accept his fate at this point. Gotham's gonna flood, and there ain't nothing he can do about it. Or is there?
That's right. So it's at that point Batman, while being shoved under the dirty, muddy sewer water of the reservoir, has a memory of something that Croc had said earlier about needing to catch his breath between heists, and also something that Alfred had said, and it jogs his memory. He remembers that while Croc may be very at home in water, he still breathes oxygen, and so he is able to attach his own rebreather so that Batman can breathe under the water, knowing that Croc, on the other hand, will need to surface for air pretty soon. As we see Croc turning and swimming back for the surface, Batman puts a grappling hook through one of the pipes, and then is able to grab a hold of Croc to keep him from surfacing. We see a bit of we see from the surface that Croc is struggling. We see his hands thrashing, trying desperately to make it above the water. And then all of a sudden, we see some air bubbles, and then we see nothing. And all of a sudden, we do see Croc emerge very slowly from the water, only to reveal that it is actually Batman carrying the unconscious Croc, who has passed out without being able to breathe underwater. He drops him next to his henchmen and humorously asks if either of them would like to give him mouth to mouth to revive him. And they wisely say no thank you to that. So he uses the little oxygen rebreather to revive Croc before chaining him and his buddies up to one of the statues in the now unflooded downtown Gotham, as Croc vows revenge and that this is not the last Batman has seen of him. But Batman goes swinging off, leaving Croc and his other henchmen for the authorities. And at the next day, we see Bruce walk into the Batcave, still covered in a bit of mud, but as a peace offering for all the extra cleaning that Alfred is about to have to do, he does bring him yet another trophy for the new museum Alfred is setting up in the Batcave. That being one of Killer Croc's giant teeth.
You missed a spot.
And I just mopped that floor. What did you bring me?
Evidence.
I shall archive this right away, sir.
And Alfred excitedly says that he will archive it immediately, as we fade to black for this week's episode. So yeah, Cal, as we kind of alluded to here, this is about as bare bones of a story as you can get, but it's not without its fun. As you said, that this version of Croc just shows up and he's a crocodile, and he can swim like a crocodile, and he's super strong, and he's got the teeth and the tail. And maybe he's an experiment, maybe he's an old circus act. It doesn't matter, because he's here, and he's evil, and he's robbing banks, and he's trying to flood the city, and Batman's got to stop him. So this episode's certainly not going to win any awards for its writing, I would say, but as far as something this straightforward goes, I think it's fine, and it creates, as many of the I feel like these early season episodes do, it creates a problem that Batman can't solve with his regular gadgets, and so he has to go get another toy. I mean another tie-in for merchandise purposes. I mean another new gear so that he can defeat the guy, and then he sort of outwits him. So we do get to see Batman in a bit of a cerebral contest here, because he simply cannot match Croc punch for punch no matter what he does, but he is able to outthink him. So, we do like to see a Batman who has to struggle and figure stuff out from time to time. This guy is certainly not, he tends to fly in fists first, and that gets him in trouble. But then he's able to outsmart Croc at the end of the day, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a fine episode. It's a fine 21, 22 minutes. I will say, I think, it's hard to not compare apples to oranges, because we are here reviewing this kind of as a direct result of doing the Croc episode last week, but we both had serious complaints about the plot for that episode. And again, we're comparing two different series, two different sets of writers, two different storytelling types. But I did, and it'll be reflected in my score. I did enjoy this episode better. Like it moves at quite the clip here. It does not drag at any point. There's not a whole lot of Batman doing investigative detective work to figure out like the actual story of what's going to happen. He just kind of stumbles upon it twice. Like he puts the water and the jet skis together and figures out that, oh, this must be where they're going to rob next, and then, oh, I see the schematic, so that means that you're going to flood the rest of Gotham. So he kind of puts, he figures that stuff out very quickly. However, what he does have to figure out, and the detective work does come from how he's going to outsmart or defeat this character that's double his size and seemingly invulnerable, and impervious to his general offense, which he handles the henchmen very easily. Like he takes those guys out pretty quickly. We see him go hand to hand off screen with, or we don't see him actually for the first time, and then one of the gadgets just takes care of him in the other. This one, he has to kind of use his brain to figure out how he's going to outsmart versus actually outpunch this guy, which, as you mentioned, is a difference kind of in the mindset for this version of Batman, especially in these early seasons here. So I do like that aspect of it, that he had to figure out and kind of put some clues together and some things that he thought about that made him realize how he could ultimately defeat Croc here for the episode. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I like the idea. I think it hasn't been done too much, even though I pointed it out at the beginning. We talked about No Man's Land. I think you mentioned before we went on the air that there's an earthquake there, which causes the flooding of Gotham, which causes all the mayhem in that famous Batman storyline from the late 90s, I think, at this point, or early 2000s. And then you have obviously, maybe the most recent and most familiar to people listening to this would be Robert Pattinson's The Batman, with the Riddler choosing to flood Gotham, and the aftermath that then followed up in the Penguin series, and what I assume we'll see in the soon to be released The Batman Part 2 from Matt Reeves. But yeah, I think that's an interesting. You don't really get to play out like what turmoil it could cause in this version of it in the way that you do in the comic books or in the movie, obviously. But I think that as a threat to realize, millions of lives could be lost. Not only that, but then, I think in our modern age where we see natural disasters, it feels like occur in real time on a weekly basis here, you do understand the long process that it takes to clean those up and what happens as a direct result of it. And so yeah, I think that as a point of tension, I think that works as a storytelling device, although it's more or less started and reversed in a very small period of time, and other than a few damaged cars, I don't think we really get to see that there's much long-term damage done to Gotham as a result of the temporary flooding here. So it wasn't completely explored in the way that it has in other media, but I do like that idea as at least somewhat of a storytelling device. But yeah, all that to say, I think this episode is a fine 22 minutes of cartoon here. There is some pretty heavy action that happens between Batman and Croc. It felt like I mentioned we don't really get to see Batman fight the henchmen in that first sequence. You hear a lot of punching and kicking and see Croc observing Batman, but I think that does feed into this idea that you get to show a lot of violence, and Batman in turn realizing that this is a formidable opponent plays into the idea of, is he going to be smart enough to figure out how to ultimately beat this guy? Because he's pretty brutal. So, as we'll talk about probably in our next category. But yeah, all that to say, it's fine. It's not good. It's not bad, or it's not great. It's not bad. I say it's probably somewhere in the middle there, which is why I ended up settling on a 5 out of 10 for plot. What about you?
Yeah, I actually settled on the exact same score of a 5 out of 10. I think it's perfectly fine for what it is. It is funny because I did find myself being like, Well, it would be interesting if Crocs was like a special forces guy, and he's like him and these other sort of former military or former mercenary types have now taken to a life of crime and all this. Like, oh, this could be really interesting, but they kind of hand wave that stuff away. So it's a pretty much just a straight adventure, but Batman doing water themed crime fighting is fun. The sequence, we'll certainly talk about that in visuals in a moment. And like we said, it does present a character that he can't just punch out on his own. He needs to think about it and use some thoughts to it. And then certainly we'll talk more about this in voice acting in a little bit, Cal. But we have to also just talk about the fact that Killer Croc is from the Bayou and speaks like Gambit in this. in this episode, and that is probably the most unique part of this Croc. Other than that, he's running around in a leather vest and no pants. Is that he really lays in almost all of his dialogue is like some sort of pun related to like shellfish or other swamp paraphernalia. And so that's kind of the little wrinkle to him, other than him just being a big crocodile man. So I think that's kind of a funny quirk to put on a guy as well. So that's probably maybe the most unique wrinkle to their version of Croc. But yeah, nothing particularly earth shattering in this version, but like we said, it's kind of a unique way to the idea of Batman having to deal with the flooded parts of the city and how to combat this guy who's so quite literally in his element. So some fun to be had there in our plot section. And now we will move on to our visuals. And once again, this week's episode directed by Brandon Vietti with animation by DR Movie Co. So let's just start off with the big one, which is obviously this version of Croc. He's like, I don't know, like 7'5" and big and wide, and he's got the big long tail. Like I say, kind of looks like the lizard from Spider-Man, but with like a leather fetish, I guess, because he's got like the big Stone Cold Steve Austin vest. But what do we think of this version of Croc? You don't necessarily have to compare it to the DCAU version, but we certainly can do that as well. But what do we think of this sort of more? He's much more crocodile than man, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've talked about it when we review the Batman, whenever we have the opportunity to do so. But the Herculean task that this show had, as far as following up the greatest incarnation of Batman, or iteration of Batman in cartoon history. Yeah, it's already set out with like a, big 3 touchdown lead for Batman the animated series. So catching up is a Herculean task, to say the least. So yeah, I think one of the things that I like about the show, though, was they decided to try and go pretty different as often as they could with the characterizations. I mean, keeping the core elements of your characters. You see that in all of our rogues, especially in the episodes that we've covered thus far. But there's always something different enough about it where it does feel like it's still uniquely Batman, but it's also uniquely this show. So if you're going to go with Croc, as we talked about, what most people remember about Croc is the gray kind of just like humanoid man with a skin condition type of look from the original Batman the animated series. A circus freak, if you will, using the words from this show. And in this case, why not go completely in the opposite direction and make him more like Lizard and some of the elements that have been used in the comic books, with him being a Cajun at that? Sure, that makes sense. People think of crocodiles, they think of Louisiana. So why not give him some of that characterization? So yeah, I like that he's kind of a big hulking dude here. I like that he's more, the animalistic side of him is kind of makes more sense than, again, I'm trying not to just do a 1-to-1 comparison to last week's episode, but it's so fresh. Like we talked about how going from the grayscaled guy to the green version of the character, if it's supposed to be the same guy, they did kind of lean more into that animalistic side, but it didn't feel, that's why it kind of felt a little disconnected from the original Batman, the animated series version of this character. So they had a chance here to do things kind of fresh from the start. I like that he's pretty intelligent for the most part, despite being a big guy. They kind of dodge the opportunity to make him a big dumb guy. He's kind of a big smart guy, to be honest. He's very verbose, as we'll talk about in the voice acting here, and the way that he uses his southern vocabulary and kind of quips and memorable little sayings that he has for everything is pretty neat. But yeah, I like this version of this character for this show. Like I said in the plot, he's really brutal, and that's I think as a big if you're gonna make him 7'5" and 500 pounds, you're gonna make him a big giant. You gotta make him a formidable opponent for Batman at that point. And Batman's not just gonna be able to use gadgets or gas or whatever to defeat him. And the times that Batman gets actually into hand-to-hand combat with him are pretty brutal. Like he gets beat up, he gets thrown around, he gets dragged underwater, he gets almost drowned a couple of times. So the fact that even when he lands punches, they almost like he and Croc go fist to fist at one point where they punch each other's fists and Batman gets blown back and you see him like shaking his fist afterwards. I like that. So yeah, I like the Croc for this series in particular. I like the Croc design. What about you?
Yeah, I think it works perfectly. I mean, the show obviously is a little bit more heightened. Everybody can like throw giant flying drop kicks and everything. So you've sort of just upped the ante, and he's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. I like the inclusion of the tail. I think that's a good, because it does feel like Batman is overmatched because even though he's probably fought other big strong guys like Bane or whoever before, Croc is pun very much intended a completely different animal. So I think the how they visualize the fights with Croc is a lot of fun. The way he kind of moves from water to land very seamlessly, and they show him to be kind of he kind of sits up perched and is watching, as you mentioned before, he actually enters the fray with Batman. And so I think they do some fun stuff with this version of Croc, to say the least. And then, yeah, elsewhere, obviously, like you said, this is an action first show, so you have that first encounter on the boat between these guys, which is a lot of fun. I love the bit where Batman's trying and failing to really land any punches on Croc for the first 20 seconds or so they're fighting, and he kind of flourishes his cape. He uses like the Arkham Knight cape stun move on him. He throws the cape up into the air, and Croc is kind of distracted, and then he punches through the cape and hits Croc, which I was like, oh, that's kind of clever as a way
Yeah.
of using his gear to sort of distract and intimidate is a very Batman thing. And then of course, as we see, he's just very overmatched. But yeah, that opening sequence on the boat, I think, is a lot of fun with those gas tankers that Croc is using to fire off at him like missiles, and then Batman kind of taking that idea and using it to keep himself from drowning. In that sequence is a lot of fun. And then we get all the stuff on the jet skis, which is also a hoot. A lot of water themed action sequences in this one.
Yeah, we get villain wetsuits. Before we move to that, I will just mention in the very opening sequence, we get a little truck that drives by that says Tim's Toy Shop on the side of it, and Tim, interestingly, is spelled with two M's. Who would spell the name Tim with two M's is my question. So, yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was weird. You think that could be a red herring, some sort of Easter egg of some kind that it's supposed to refer to something? I don't know. Who knows?
Could be.
But Tim's Toy Shop, if you know, join in the conversation on our social media or comment if you're listening on Spotify. Yeah, Tim's Toy Shop shows up there. And then, I think the trophy room obviously playing a central point here. We get a storyline reason for why the trophy room exists, which I really enjoy. We don't quite get the story in the Batman the Animated Series, obviously. We see the stuff by the time we get to Batman Beyond and have the full trophies there. And you can kind of put two and two together for why Batman has all the costumes and the puppets and all the other stuff stored there. But we don't really get a full story of why Batman has ninja swords in his Batcave in Batman the Animated Series. We do get the giant penny explained, of course, but that's really the only thing that we get explained for that version of the Batman the Animated Series before we get to Batman Beyond. But I like here we have a storyline reason and the things that he collects. It's one of the defining features for the Batcave, whatever the Batman is, whoever your Batman is. So the fact that we have an on-screen explanation introduction here of Alfred being the one to decide that Batman's evidence is no longer going to be stored in boxes, that it's going to be proudly on display for him to appreciate, and perhaps one day, as he puts it, museum style, that people will actually appreciate Batman for who he was. Which I think we actually do get to see that eventually in that Mr. Freeze flash forward future episode with Nightwing and Mr. Freeze and Batman and Oracle. So we do know that Batman changes at some point, and the opinion on Batman is one that's positive. So there you go, Alfred. Alfred, a little fortune teller there. He can soothsayer there, can tell the future. But yeah, as far as the water fight, yeah, you were spot on with that. I like the villains' little wetsuits that they all wear, which is kind of awesome. And to not be left out, Batman also gets his little wetsuit as well, which, as you mentioned, was an action figure, by the way. It didn't quite match up to what we saw on the screen, as so many of those action figures were. I believe you actually owned this action figure, Aqua Attack Batman. He was all yellow. He had flippers. He had a little bit more.
Yes.
He had a little bit more as far as the activity, but he did come with that little kind of propulsion bat sub thing, which is kind of cool that Batman ends up using in this episode. So, yeah, I like the water stuff. Batman fighting in and on and around water is always fun, as you mentioned. So, some of the stuff that he ends up doing here, the underwater battles with that greenish hue that you get, really, Killer Croc just always saddled with dirty, gross green water. Perhaps Gotham should look into doing some, I don't know, some better water filtering or something, because their harbors are absolutely hideous and disgusting. That water is gross. Batman should get tested for all of the diseases at this point. But yeah, he's the fights down there are great. And one of the things I noticed, that bat rebreather that he pulls out and is able to use to breathe underwater, ultimately foiling Croc by keeping him underwater, and then bringing him back to life at the end by sharing the rebreather with him once he's on dry land. That reminded me a whole heck of a lot of the Batman 66. I think it's the movie. Maybe he uses it in the movie. I can't remember. But there's definitely a Batman 66 episode where he and Robin, they have a underwater fight, from my recollection, where they're both wearing those. And it takes completely underwater, and they're wearing rebreathers that look exactly like that. So a little Batman 66 homage here. You can't go too far without honoring what came before you. So yeah, I loved that. The Bat jet ski is cool, as we said there. And yeah, I think the most brutal violence, though, that we get here is the crushing of the crocodiles. Croc's pet crocs bite the dust by just being crushed by a whole bunch of heavy rocks. That's really the most violent thing that we see here. Although Croc loses a tooth by biting into something metal. He bites into one of the metal turbine things or canal valves, and loses a tooth because of it. So that is also pretty violent as far as this show is concerned. But yeah, there's some good stuff here. I think overall the scene with the oxygen tanks or whatever they are being used as missiles is great. Batman using that. Batman's exploration under the water. The fight sequences underwater are great also. So I actually went with a pretty strong 7 out of 10 for my animation for this week's episode. I think it's good. Always good to see Batman with a gigantic cape. Also, lots of stuff moving around with that. As you mentioned, that one use of it in the fight scene is great. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Good stuff from DR Movie Co. this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of fun. Like you said, some really unique backgrounds with all of the flooded areas of Gotham, and I love the shot of them like swimming out of the bank, holding their gold bars and diamonds and cash as they hop on their jet skis. And then there's a kind of a fun little camera trick when Batman catches the lead henchman, and he opens his eyes, and the camera kind of swings around as we realize that the guy is upside down, which I thought was a neat camera trick as well. So all in all, pretty strong visual episode. I thought I ended up giving it a 7 out of 10.
There you go. 2 7s. Look at that. We're 2 for 2 thus far.
How about that? And from there, we will move on to music. Music this week by Thomas Chase Jones. Yeah, I'll be honest. There is like with a lot of times with the Batman show, there's very little music. It's mostly just these little like echoey guitar refrains to punctuate whatever was said at the end of the scene. There is like a little bit of a Bayou twang to the guitars in a few of those end scene dialogue bits, and then we do get our kind of drum machine action synthesizer music during our fight scenes as expected. So a pretty solid outing, but I did not have a ton in the music section. What about you?
Yeah, I like Croc does get kind of his own unique theme that is played with guitar. It's more in those first couple of scenes than anything. But it is definitely unique. It shows up again when he's on the jet ski, which to me, again, we review this every couple of months or so, probably every 6 months or so. And remember, if you want to encourage us to review it more, head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review and become a one-time supporter today. But I digress. I don't remember a ton of theme songs for individual villains standing out, at least. I won't say they don't exist. But in this case, this one uses a electric guitar, but it is completely different than the punctuating guitar that we hear from the high-pitched sort of The Edge theme song inspired guitar that, as you mentioned, is sort of just used as punctuation and scene transition music. So this is, he shows up, he gets this real kind of deep sounding, almost, it's not a didgeridoo, but it has that same sort of tone to it where it's kind of deep. It's an electric guitar. It plays that similar sort of just deep sounding theme that Croc has, and he gets a unique sound. So I like that plays here. You played a couple of times during the episode. So yeah, I think that in and of itself stood out to me. I do think that, in watching this show, yes, the music was kind of used differently as we talked about, but I do think that refrain that they use, the transition refrain, the punctuation refrain to kind of emphasize a certain bit of dialogue or a certain discovery of something, is pretty effective for what this show wanted it to do. So yeah, I ended up, all that considered, I gave it a 6 out of 10 for this week. I really did enjoy that Croc theme. What about you?
Nice. Yeah, I was just 1 point lower at 5 out of 10. So I thought it was solid, but maybe didn't stand out as much to me. But I like that, and definitely, yeah, I did. There's giving Croc his own guitar twang, pun very much intended as well. But about to get to voice acting here is certainly a nice touch. And with that, Cal, we will move to our final category of the day, which is, as mentioned, voice acting. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this might be one of the smallest voice casts we've ever had for a single episode, though a bunch of heavy hitters nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. Some very recognizable names here we'll go through. And yes, it is a small but mighty cast. So as we go here from the beginning, so playing two of our henchmen, who I believe are credited with the names Vic and Freddy, are both credited to one Jim Cummings, which if you're a voice acting nerd like the two of us, you probably already recognize that voice. But if you are not a voice acting nerd, you certainly know the roles that he plays or has played. So famously, around the time of the Batman the Animated Series, he was the voice of Darkwing Duck in the Darkwing Duck series. That's a cult classic that a lot of people enjoy. And then we also have him, I think his most famous role would be that of Tigger, Winnie the Pooh's friend, in a couple of roles, even most recently in the Christopher Robin movie, I believe a live action movie from 2018.
Oh,
So, still to this day, doing roles and getting that Tigger role there. But he's played Tigger a whole bunch. He's got a whole bunch of things
Mhm.
to his voice acting
I was gonna
credit.
say, you would also know him quite a bit as the old Kids WB announcer voice, the man who shouted heavy duty dubbas at us
There
every
you go.
week.
A recognizable voice, to say the least. Most recently, still doing work today, credited in 2026 with Mickey Mouse Club Plus. So, still there doing stuff. So, yeah, it's great to hear him. Not a ton for him to do. He's talking to himself, not literally, but playing two characters that interact with each other here. Mostly just with some dialogue here, although I believe he is the henchman that has to sort of temporarily discuss the backstory of our Killer Croc before Batman dismisses it and says it's of no interest to him. But yeah, he does a fine job here, and I think when you know it's Mr. Cummings, you certainly recognize the voice of your kids' WB Saturday mornings or Tigger or Darkwing Duck.
Absolutely.
And then moving on here, we'll go to another bit player for this episode, Mr. Alistair Duncan, of course, who is returning as Alfred Pennyworth for this series. I believe he also may play the uncredited as one of the broadcasters that comes on and does like a small news report
Hmm.
here. Mr. Duncan, not a ton for him to do. As is the case, though, he usually provides at least one or two key scenes of interacting with Batman as he puts the story together. But as we've talked about here in his many roles, certainly has come back to voice Batman's butler Alfred multiple times in multiple different iterations. Most recently in the Crisis on Infinite Earths movie in 2024. If you're not going to have Ephraim Zemblis Jr., which of course at this point, dear Ephraim has left us and left this earth, I think your
Hmm.
next man up, and I think best characterization of the Alfred character, I think I would have to hand it to Mr. Duncan. He's pretty dynamic in the way that he does the voice. He's got a little bit of sass to him, especially in this role. He has to correct
Hmm.
Bruce a few times about him dripping water or mud on his freshly cleaned floors or leaving his dripping clothes laying around, which is a funny bit here. But yeah, he's a little bit sassier than somehow than our Ephraim Zemblis Jr., who in and of itself was a very sassy Alfred at times. But this one, I love his Alfred, and it's always great to hear him, even if it's in kind of these minor moments that are just kind of moving the plot along.
Absolutely, yeah. He's a lot of fun. Always good to, especially in these early seasons before we have Batgirls and Robins. We got to have somebody for Bruce to bounce some dialogue, and as you said, to maybe give him a little bit of a humorous needling from time to time. So Mr. Duncan is more than up to the task. A great Alfred.
Absolutely. And then, of course, before we get to our most recognizable voice of the episode, we'll talk about our Batman. Of course, Reno Romano, once again, reprising his role as Batman for this season two. And we've talked about, of course, Mr. Romano, most notably to us or memorable to us, those Spider-Man PlayStation games from the early 2000s. He was our
Hmm.
Spider-Man for that. He's done a lot of video game work, including Resident Evil, Knights of the Old Republic. Done a lot of voice acting stuff. Most recently, he
Hmm.
was credited with doing some voices in the Super Mario Galaxy movie. So still doing voice acting. Again, somebody else is still doing voice acting to this day. Mr. Romano has certainly has a unique Batman. It's different than Kevin Conroy. We've talked about it every time we've reviewed this show. He's a little bit more naive, a little bit more headstrong. I do like, again, I talked about, I think, in our plot discussion here, he doesn't really have to put the pieces of the puzzle together as far as what the actual plot is at times, but he does have to kind of think about and figure out how he's going to take down this formidable foe of his that isn't simply responding to fists, at least his normal fists here. So I do like that he gets a nice little quip at the end about mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to the to the two henchmen, which I like. But yeah, I like Mr. Romano's Batman. I will always give him kudos for following up the greatest of all time and doing a solid job. Tough shoes to fill, and I think he did a pretty good job at it, all things considered.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think he does a solid job. Yeah, this Batman again, he's got to do his own quips. He doesn't have a teen sidekick to do the quips for him, so he's a little more chatty certainly than our other Dark Knight that we often talk about on this show. But yeah, I think he does a very good job of what's asked of him in this episode.
Absolutely. And then rounding out our order here, our Ragin' Cajun for the day, none other than Ron Perlman providing the voice for our Killer Croc. Of course, Ron Perlman, known for many things, including Hellboy himself, at least the original Hellboy. And then, of course, as friend of the show, Matthew Valencia pointed out when he first met Mr. Perlman on the voice that we probably best know him for, he was on the Beauty and the Beast television series in the late 80s. So we know that Mr. Perlman has been around for a long time, done a lot of roles. Maybe Sons of Anarchy is something that you know him from or appreciate him from. But we all know him as the voice of Clayface, of course, in the DCAU. Mr. Perlman, honestly, I think if you're going to cast Ron Perlman in a role here and you ask him, like, asking him to do an accent or at least change the way that he speaks isn't a bad choice. I don't know that he nails a Cajun accent here. I think it's a more like Foghorn Leghorn at times, it sounds like, but
A little bit.
I think it's better than just trying to get him to do Ron Perlman because it would have been a little distracting for me. So it's not quite the Channing Tatum distracting Gambit voice from the Deadpool movie, but I think it's better. I think it's not distracting, and that's a good thing in this case, that it's not over the top Cajun. No offense to any of our listeners that are Cajun or might speak the Cajun dialect with a Cajun dialect, but I think the people that speak it, I think it's awesome to hear those people do it, but I think it's very difficult to try and recreate that and not sound a little goofy when you do it. So Mr. Perlman doing his best to sort of vaguely homage the Cajun dialect while also just kind of doing more of a Southern voice. While the dialogue is great, he gets to do all these witty sayings and little tiny monikers and things that he drops in here about Batman's annoyance and the plot and all of this and the happiness of his henchmen and all of this. So yeah, I think unsurprisingly, Mr. Perlman, whether he's asked to do just a straightforward Ron Perlman voice or maybe southern it up a little bit, yes, really solid, strong job.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think he's a lot of fun in this. To your point, it takes you maybe a minute or two to settle into it, just because it is very clearly still Ron Perlman, and he has such a recognizable rasp to his voice, and as we've talked about him so many times on the show before, between Clayface and Slade and some of those other roles that he's taken on over the years in DC cartoons. But yeah, I think you settle into it, and like you said, he does have a lot of his dialogues are like, he's calling buildings lily pads, and he's got a line about shellfish or whatever, but he's the delivery itself, to your point, is not super over the top to the point, like you said, it becomes a complete parody or a complete caricature. So it's a tight line to walk, I think, when you're given those sort of cliche lines and then and turns of phrase, and then also you're trying to do an accent which is maybe not natural to you. But yeah, I think he's a lot of fun as our Croc, and I actually settled on a pretty solid 6 out of 10 for our voice acting score this week.
Nice. I just went 1 point higher with mine. I went 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed most of Mr. Perlman's stuff there once I got settled into it. So just a little bit higher, 1 point for me.
Nice. And with that, Cal, that will bring us to our final scores of the day. And tallying everything up, I believe I settled on a final score of 23 out of 40.
Yeah, and we differed. Yeah, we differed in just those last two categories by 1 point, which means my final score is 25 out of 40.
Nice. Yeah. So, as we often say with the Elseworlds, because we just kind of drop in on a random episode, we don't really do the traditional rewatchability. So, yeah, I don't know that this is a must watch if you're just cherry picking a couple episodes of the whole series, but it's a Batman villain from the comics, and also he does have a few memorable appearances. So, yeah, you could do worse than to watch this one if you were going and picking an episode of the Batman to view.
Yeah, it's a fun one. I agree with you. I think that if anything, it's a lot of fun from start to finish. It moves at a clip, as I mentioned. It there's doesn't drag. It's easy enough to follow the plot. There's some fun fighting there in the sequences. There's some good Batman stuff. It's the origin of Batman's trophy room for this series, which
Mm-hmm.
is going to play into, as we already talked about, eventually plays into the idea of Batman's the position with the city changing. So yeah, I'd say give it a watch.
Absolutely. And thank everybody for tuning in this week for our special Elseworlds review. We appreciate you, whether you listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, perhaps you're on YouTube, wherever you listen to us, we appreciate it. We would just ask that you make sure you're subscribed to us. If you're on one of the apps that lets you rate us, give us 5 stars. If you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, or on Spotify, you can leave a comment on each episode and we will try to respond to you. Same with our YouTube. Make sure you're liking the videos and you're subscribed. Even if you don't use YouTube to follow our podcast, we would appreciate it if you just subscribe, because it'll help bump us up in those search algorithms, let us monetize the channel and all that stuff. We appreciate that. The other great free ways to support us are, of course, on our social media. You can head to @DCAU Review on pretty much everything. Your easiest way of getting a hold of us would definitely be either on Instagram or the artist formerly known as Twitter. But you can also check us out on Blue Sky, Threads, even technically Facebook as well, though your response time may vary. We appreciate those ways. If you'd like to put a little coin in the piggy bank, to turn a phrase, there are ways to support us more directly and financially. And the first one, of course, as mentioned earlier, I believe, is in our show notes. You can head to our store, pick yourself up a shirt, a mug, a sticker, or something. We get a nice piece of that, so we appreciate that. Or, of course, as Cal and I talked about earlier, you can head to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, where if you are a monthly donator, you are able to actually get a couple of perks, including the ability to ask us a question. And I believe we have one this week from our friend Zach.
We do indeed. So Zach was really excited that we were reviewing the Batman. See, Zach loves when we review the Batman, and he's a monthly supporter. Is that a coincidence? I'm not saying it is, but I'm also not saying it isn't. But with that, since he loves when we review the Batman, he got his question in this week, and we're going to answer it. So his question is about Croc's origin. He says, for this series, I like, meaning Zach likes the genetic experiment crossbred soldier version. What are your thoughts? So, Liam, as we talked about, the origin is kind of, there's a couple of options that are thrown out there. It's very quickly glossed over because it's irrelevant to Batman as to what his origin is, and thus kind of supposed to be irrelevant to the viewer as to why this talking lizard-looking man is the way that he is. But I would agree with Zach. It's fun to speculate on what the origin is. So what say you?
Yeah, I think when how well and how quickly him and his henchmen gel, there's clearly some. It feels very militaristic. It feels like special ops or something, and how they're interacting. Maybe some Navy SEALs or something, or some kind of mercenary group or something, some sort of offshoot of a military group. So yeah, I think that fits because the pattern they seem to have, they're very organized, and they fall in line very well, and they each have their own little missions, and they split up and they take care of things together. I mean, the henchmen aren't really that competent, clearly, but Croc clearly has a a bit more of a cerebral presence to him that suggests he's a more of a strategist, and he certainly gets his men to fall in line quite easily. So yeah, I like the idea of there being some kind of military background to this version of Croc. What about you?
Yeah, I'll make it unanimous because it doesn't quite lend to the circus freak, which we kind of see the Batman the Animated Series version is more akin to. I also don't know if you're gonna tie in like the hybrid thing. I don't know that it's just a science project gone mad or a scientist gone mad. Story alone makes a whole lot of sense for this universe per se. The guys, there's not a lot of explanation or that sort of character depth that's explored. So I'd say it makes more sense. Yeah, based on the evidence that we have, at least for this episode, he's very quick to take control. He gets these kind of ragtag group here, although they were having some success before him. He's able to quickly organize them, get them matching suits, get them to fall in line, and then he does have a quick plan that he's able to come up with and enact, and then attempts, in theory, was going to enact this all-out attack on Gotham, so to speak, here, using the vulnerabilities once he's created new waterways. So yeah, seems very military. So I would definitely agree with that. Thank you, Zach, for your question for this week. And don't forget, if you would like to join Zach and the list of our growing supporters, please head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review and consider supporting the podcast today.
Absolutely, Cal. Couldn't have said it any better myself. And however you choose to support our podcast, we hope you'll continue to do it next week when we kick off a new month. And Cal, as part of a little algorithmic synergy, perhaps, there happens to be a new DC film coming out a little bit later in June. So we thought we could tie it in with a couple of reviews, or re-reviews in some cases, that feature a certain Girl of Steel.
That is right, Liam. In case you haven't heard, people are already trying. It's already very controversial from what I understand. I don't know if maybe my algorithm is just a bunch of Snyderverse guys and they're already trying to hate on it. Or maybe people just, I don't know, they're just destined to hate movies because it has, I don't know, a woman as the lead. I don't know. Maybe that says more about my algorithm than anything. I don't know. But yeah, I do see some people that are excited about it. I guess we'll see in a couple of weeks here what ends up happening and how well the actual movie is received. But that's right, Supergirl is coming to theaters, and we are going to celebrate Supergirl with Supergirl Month. So we will be taking a look back at several of her appearances in the DCAU, and we'll have some exciting things to talk about, including some episodes of Superman the Animated Series and maybe an Elseworld if we get around to it. But it's sure to be a fun month of reviews of Supergirl, in honor of Supergirl coming again to the big screen for the first time since, the late 80s that Supergirl is making a big screen appearance?
I believe so, starring DCAU alum Helen Slater, if I'm not mistaken. So, yes, certainly in need of an update to stand across from the new Superman that we got last year. Excited to see that movie, excited to revisit some episodes of Superman the Animated Series that we covered quite a long time ago, starting with Little Girl Lost Part 1 next week. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
G'day.